moving forward with awareness, empathy, and compassion. I'm Ben Oofana, recording this video from the middle of New York City, Midtown Manhattan. So you may hear some sirens going off in the background. Anyway, so much depth and detail contained in this article, as is usually the case, so I will be reading from the article itself. We come into this world helpless, completely dependent upon our parents or whoever ends up caring for us. Even as we grow from childhood into adulthood, we still find ourselves interacting with people and navigating all kinds of circumstances that are in many ways unfamiliar to us. Much of my adolescence was spent in Southeast Texas. Hunting was a common thing for boys and men to do. Guns and hunting were simply part of the culture. Like so many of my peers, I had guns, a .22 rifle and a shotgun, and would go out hunting squirrels and rabbits. I was an extraordinarily good shot. Had I been influenced differently, I could have gone down a very different path, possibly even becoming a sniper in the military or something. Looking back now, I feel absolutely sickened by my actions at that time. What many people call hunting today is in many cases little more than killing animals for sport. I can understand why Native Americans and other groups who relied on deer, elk, and buffalo as primary food sources, who made use of every part of the animal. Their hides, for instance, were used for clothing and even shelter. Yet, for most people, over the past centuries, it has been treated as a sport. As I reflect on those times, I find myself asking, why in the world would any child or teen be allowed to possess firearms, especially without supervision? No one ever spoke to me, not even once, about the sacredness of all forms of life, not just human. And to make matters worse, I was growing up in a hugely toxic environment and experiencing a great deal of trauma. In hindsight, I can see that I was externalizing that trauma. As the traumas and other emotional wounding began to heal, I became much more compassionate. And wherever I go, I do what I can to care for and rescue animals. I find myself spending time with and petting, feeding, and sometimes providing medicine to street dogs when I'm in Sri Lanka. I'll catch the frogs in my friends' homes with my hands and take them outside. I catch mice in live traps and set them free. I'll pick up earthworms and slugs I find on the sidewalk and carry them over to the grass where they have a chance of surviving. I've stopped while driving on occasion to pick up turtles in the road and set them safely out of harm's way. It is especially difficult for me to witness the suffering of dogs in shelters. They're caged, stressed, fearful, anxious, and vulnerable to diseases such as parvo and kennel cough. Each year in the United States, more than 3 million dogs enter shelters, and roughly 350 to 400,000 are euthanized. I do what I can to educate people not to purchase dogs from breeders or pet stores, as this contributes to the overpopulation and ensures that more dogs will suffer. Instead, I encourage you to adopt from shelters if you're going to take in a dog. And the lack of awareness I initially described didn't just show up in how I related to animals, it also carried over into how I related to people. As I came of age, girls and later young women were also beginning to capture my attention. I found myself flooded with a range of intense emotions I didn't fully comprehend or know how to deal with. Hormones surging and everything feeling amplified. While I didn't do anything horrible, there were times I crossed lines and failed to recognize and honor appropriate boundaries. Even though I was in many ways very numb, dissociated, and carrying a great deal of trauma, one thing I did have going for me was that I was empathic enough to feel how these girls and later women were responding to me emotionally. In those moments, I knew when I was in the wrong. And because I genuinely care, I felt horrible about it. And I found myself asking, what do I need to understand here? And what do I need to do differently? In those moments, I made a conscious decision not to violate those same boundaries again. And I began conducting myself differently. Again, in all those years growing up, throughout childhood, adolescence, and even into early adulthood, I don't remember anyone ever sitting down with me to talk about how to engage with women, appropriate boundaries, or any kind of healthy relating. All I had were occasional exchanges with some of my peers, who at the time were just as inexperienced, confused, and ignorant as I was. They certainly were no help, so it was up to me to learn and figure out much of this on my own. Even in the context of relationships I've been in, there were many instances where I overstepped boundaries, failed to understand my partner's needs, or was simply being an idiot. Not in any way to justify my own failings, yet I see this constantly in other people's relationships, among friends, people I've worked with, and those I've known in other contexts. I can see how it often damages their relationships and in many cases leads to their dissolution. For me, I can see that much of it stemmed from a lack of experience and understanding. And because I was carrying so much trauma, I was often numb, dissociated, and blind to what I was acting out. For all of my shortcomings, I was also fortunate in some respects. From the time I entered college, I began forming friendships with many women. Later, as I built my practice and found myself working with a predominantly female clientele, I had the opportunity to listen, learn, and gain a much deeper understanding of their experiences. It was through these relationships and conversations that I learned a great deal. In many ways, I consider myself very fortunate to have had the opportunity to train with Horace Dokai, one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa, and with Chinese master Shifu Li Tai Liang in Xingyi Quan and Baguazhang, internal martial arts rooted in Taoism. I also spent considerable time with Buddhist monks and with others who had attained varying levels of mastery in the Hindu Vedic disciplines. And while I placed a great deal of significance on the process of development that comes through these ancient spiritual traditions, I also view relationships and the bonds we form with a partner as a path of personal, interpersonal, and spiritual development. For this reason, I make a concerted effort to approach my relationships as a critically important part of my own process of healing and growth. The individuals we partner with and form attachments to often bring us into contact with the most vulnerable and deeply wounded parts of ourselves. For me, this has been extraordinarily painful at times, yet by embracing my lived experience, even when it has been difficult, and allowing myself to come into contact with the parts of me that were hurting, along with the emotions I'd spent so much of my life either numbing or avoiding, I've been able to make considerable progress in healing these parts of myself. It has compelled me to grow. It has helped me to become a better friend and companion, and ultimately a better person. Whether I was in the midst of a breakup, had been ghosted, or was experiencing other difficulty within a relationship, or in situations where I had formed an attachment and my feelings were not being reciprocated, I worked with the practice I often described. I would bring that person and the relational dynamic between us to the forefront of my awareness. I would notice what I was feeling in response, and then breathe softly and deeply while fully immersing my awareness in the depths of those feelings and bodily sensations. In addition, I made a concerted effort to make use of the most effective therapeutic interventions to help facilitate the healing of the deep emotional wounds I was not fully capable of healing on my own. It's this consistency that has made healing and transformation possible. And I see that reflected back to me as the quality of my relationships continues to improve. Looking back, I cannot help but see how blind, disconnected, and oblivious I was. My actions were driven in large part by my own ignorance, confusion, and the trauma I had internalized. As those traumatic wounds have healed, and as I've been able to metabolize other lived experiences along with the backlog of stress and stagnant emotions I was carrying, my vision has become to open and continues to expand. Even though I still find myself in challenging situations that put me in touch with the more vulnerable parts of myself, I continue learning. I become far more aware, more empathic, and much more lucid. We all come into life lacking awareness and understanding. We are all carrying deep emotional wounds. It's a combination of conditioning, confusion, emotional wounding, and a lack of modeling that often blinds us in ways that prevent us from seeing what we are doing and the impact we are having on others and the world around us. That is why we often violate boundaries, hurt others, and behave in ways we later regret, feeling shame and guilt. Yet I encourage you, as I have done myself, to embrace your relationships as a path of healing, a path through which you can grow and transform yourself. As your awareness deepens, you begin to see and feel what you could not before. The impact of your actions on others, where you have crossed boundaries, and the pain you may have caused. And this can be quite uncomfortable, bringing up feelings of guilt, sadness, regret, grief, and anger towards yourself, even disgust. Yet, this is not something to run from. For many of us, this is where growth actually begins. Most of us were never taught how to relate or navigate relationships in any kind of healthy way, or how to respect boundaries, take responsibility, or work constructively with our own emotional responses. Matters are further compounded by the fact that many of us grew up with parents and in environments that were chaotic, toxic, and at times neglectful or abusive. This is not to excuse harmful or inappropriate behavior, but it can help us come to a deeper understanding of ourselves and others. If we're able to make amends and apologize, it's good to do so. Yet, it is not enough to only apologize. If that's all we do, we haven't really changed or grown from the experience. We've only acknowledged our actions. What matters is how we conduct ourselves moving forward. This means refraining from the behaviors that have caused harm, developing the awareness to recognize these patterns so we are not reenacting them, and learning to relate to others in ways that are more considerate, caring, and nurturing. Many people attempt to rationalize the words and actions that have caused harm or numb themselves to and bury their emotions. Yet this only reinforces the blindness that drives the very words and actions that maintain dysfunction and often result in further harm. It is critically important that we face what we've done and work effectively with our own emotional responses, whether shame, sadness, grief, guilt, or remorse. In doing so, we begin to understand how our words and actions have impacted others. Attempting to bypass these essential steps only perpetuates the dysfunction. Opening ourselves to reflection and doing the deep-level processing of the emotions that arise is a crucial part of the healing that needs to occur. This is where real change begins. It also involves incorporating practices such as those I teach that enable you to work effectively with your own emotional responses, along with making use of the most effective therapeutic interventions. As we begin to digest what we have been holding within us, we gain a deeper understanding of the patterns we have enacted. Our emotional capacity expands, and we begin to respond differently. As our awareness deepens, our sensitivity increases. We become more empathetic. We recognize boundaries more easily. We feel the impact of our words and actions, and we begin to move through the world with greater care. While I've written much of this in the context of romantic relationships, it applies to all of our relationships, whether with our parents, children, siblings, and other family members, friends, or anyone else who plays a significant role in our lives. We cannot change what has already occurred, but we can learn from it and allow it to shape how we live now, so that we move forward with greater awareness, empathy, and compassion, not only toward others, so that we don't remain stuck in patterns where we are harming them, but also toward ourselves, so we don't remain caught in destructive cycles of shame and self-condemnation. We all start out lacking awareness. What matters now is a willingness to do whatever it takes to heal and grow. That we are willing to see, to take responsibility, and live differently.